So I really don't want to be the channel that just keeps dumping on PlayStation related things every day, but honestly, they're making it a little too easy for me. I made 3 videos in a row related to the Last of Us PC port, and I'm sure I'll inevitably make another one in the future, probably once The Last of Us Part 2 comes out on PC just as broken as this one, and Neil Druckmann continues to refuse to take any responsibility for it. That's just my cynical prediction. But let me run a scenario by you, dear viewer. You were scrolling through Twitter the other day, and you saw that Jim Ryan started trending. Now, Jim Ryan has been working overtime trying to make himself the most unlikable person in the gaming industry ever since Microsoft announced they were going to buy Activision Blizzard. He's been either completely missing the point of everything or just intentionally trying to take advantage of lawmakers and regulators who don't know any better. Either way, the dude is very, very unlikable. And his most recent piece of unlikableness apparently came from a recent meeting with the CMA where he claimed that if Xbox were to get control of Activision Blizzard and Call of Duty were to start getting nerfed on the PlayStation, because that's been the big fear recently. That's the big giant fear that Jim Ryan has. Originally, the big fear was that Call of Duty was going to stop coming out on the PlayStation in the first place, and then Microsoft went out of their way to completely shut all those fears down as publicly as possible, which has to be the most public execution thing I've ever seen between 2 major game companies. Literally every time PlayStation says anything, Microsoft comes out with a megaphone attached to a loudspeaker, attached to a jumbotron, saying that PlayStation is lying about the thing. But Jim Ryan can't just back off of the situation. He can't just admit defeat. No. He has to keep doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on the fact that Call of Duty, of all things, is what's keeping PlayStation afloat, which is super ironic when you consider the fact that Sony has been boasting for years about their first-party games and how awesome their first-party exclusives are. Ooh, everyone loves us because of our first-party games. But now that Call of Duty might be owned by Microsoft, which is going to have no effect on you or your platform, all of a sudden, everything is falling apart. The most recent statement from Jim Ryan came on April 6th, in which he claimed that any degradation in the price, performance, or quality of play on PlayStation or any delays on release would quickly harm SIE's reputation and cause a loss of engagement and of players. As SIE's CEO Jim Ryan explained to the CMA at the Remedies hearing, if PlayStation received a degraded version of Call of Duty, it would seriously damage our reputation. Our gamers would desert our platform in droves, and network effects would exacerbate the problem. Our business would never recover.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
And I think this little screenshot compilation from Andrea Piccinini, but I think this sums it up pretty solidly. Jim Ryan can no longer say that Microsoft, ooh, they're gonna take Call of Duty away from us. Microsoft's like, no, we're not. Jim Ryan can no longer be like, ooh, they're going to do timed exclusivity for Call of Duty, because Microsoft was like, no, we're not. So now Jim Ryan has to claim that the PlayStation version of Call of Duty is going to be nerfed somehow, and it's not going to stop coming out. It's just going to be nerfed. And PlayStation is never going to recover from Call of Duty possibly being slightly nerfed on the PlayStation. This is the dumbest thing I've heard out of Jim Ryan's mouth in a while. But let's just go through a few important details here. Why is this so stupid, and why is this such a gigantic lie? First of all, this statement exists off the notion that Call of Duty cannot be viable on a platform where it's nerfed. That if Call of Duty comes out on Xbox and PlayStation, but the PlayStation version is slightly worse, maybe slightly worse performing graphically, or maybe it just doesn't have all of these gigantic PlayStation exclusive perks. So if the game is the same on Xbox and PlayStation, or slightly worse on PlayStation, all of a sudden people are going to desert your platform in droves and your business would never recover. Let's just explore that for a second. Frankly, for as long as I can remember, the Xbox version of Call of Duty has been nerfed compared to the PlayStation version. Do you remember when Call of Duty Ghosts came out and the Xbox One version was running at 720p? Because I remember that. Do you remember the Xbox One version of Black Ops 3 being wildly unoptimized, featuring like multi-minute load screens in between multiplayer matches? Because I remember that. I was playing Black Ops 3 on the Xbox One and I remember that. And that's not even getting into all the timed exclusivity and all the PlayStation exclusive content that Call of Duty has had. One thing that's actually missing from this chart here is the fact that Modern Warfare Remastered, remember that game? Yeah, that game literally launched a month fucking early on PlayStation. And despite all of these things that I just said about the non-PlayStation versions of these Call of Duty games, Call of Duty has continued to exist on Xbox. It has continued to exist rather well on Xbox. But what about the PC? What about Call of Duty on the PC? Call of Duty's seen a pretty massive resurgence on the PC since, 2018, 19-ish. Like, official Call of Duty releases on the PC were pretty shit from, I want to say, like MW2 up until Black Ops 4. Black Ops 4 is when they kind of started turning things around. I'm a former, big Call of Duty fan. I actually used to play this franchise quite a lot, but Modern Warfare 2019 kind of killed all interest I had in it. I've recently been playing Cold War a bit, because Cold War was brought to Steam and I decided to give it a try, and it's actually okay. I mean, I certainly would not pay full price for it. And the only reason I'm playing it now is because I didn't pay full price for it. I paid like 30% price for it. It's worth that. That's a little off topic. But let's talk about Call of Duty on the PC, since Jim Ryan wants to freak out about PlayStation not having the absolute best version of Call of Duty all the time, and that's somehow the sole thing keeping his platform afloat, which I think is honestly a massive just slap in the face to every single PlayStation developer. This statement quite explicitly says that PlayStation only continues to thrive because of Call of Duty. That is very explicitly what Jim Ryan is saying here. It's not the truth, but it's what he's saying. And that is so fucking disrespectful to the people at Santa Monica Studios, to the people at Naughty Dog, to the people at Insomniac, to the people at Sucker Punch. If you are a first-party PlayStation developer and then your boss just comes out and says, oh no, it's Call of Duty. If we don't have the best version of Call of Duty, people will abandon our platform in droves. It has nothing to do with the first-party games. It has nothing to do with our exclusive franchises. That is so fucking insulting. And it just proves how low this guy is willing to go to avoid any kind of competition in this market. It's so gross. But anyways, back to the PC, the point I keep trying to make about COD on the PC. Call of Duty has been seeing a big resurgence on the PC, despite the fact that the PC versions of Call of Duty don't have all the PlayStation exclusive content, aside from the fact that the PC versions of Call of Duty are usually buggy as shit, and yet the PC seems to be doing just fine with Call of Duty. The point I'm getting at here is that Jim Ryan is trying to argue that without Call of Duty, the PlayStation brand is just going to blow up into a gigantic fire. And yet, other platforms seem to be doing just fine with Call of Duty, despite not having all of the PlayStation exclusive Call of Duty perks. So really, what are you trying to say here, Jim? Are you trying to argue that without your paid third-party exclusivity, PlayStation is going to die? Because your competing platforms have already proven a million times that's not true. So are you ignorant or are you lying? Also, I want to point out the fucking irony of this guy being so scared that Microsoft is going to release a worse version of Call of Duty on the PlayStation if they own the IP, mere weeks after The Last of Us had a disastrous fucking launch on the PC. You're so scared of Microsoft not handling third-party game ports well, when you yourself are handling third-party game ports arguably worse than anyone else right now. Sony's been striking up deals with third-party companies for exclusivity, and it's like Andreas says in the screenshot. Sony literally pays third-party devs to prioritize PS5 versions on big multi-plat releases, so the PS5 version is better optimized and uses Digital Foundry to sell the idea that PS5 runs games better. And that's not even mentioning the fact that Sony will actively make sure that major games don't get Xbox releases at all. Final Fantasy 15 was on the Xbox, Final Fantasy 16 will not be. Sony goes goes out of their way to pay third-party developers for multi-platform games to have exclusive content on the PlayStation. And it was just how long ago that Sony swooped in and bought Bungie, an originally Microsoft-owned studio? Destiny 2 is one of the biggest games in the world, and Sony owns the studio making it. To act like they have any leg to stand on with this for what Microsoft is trying to do, Microsoft is trying to do the exact same thing to Activision that Sony already did to Bungie, and we're just not supposed to talk about that? Sony is so scared of Microsoft doing something with Call of Duty that Sony themselves have already done with The Last of Us 2 weeks ago, and we're just not supposed to talk about that? Jim Ryan is so fucking dishonest and hypocritical and scummy, and it's so stupid to watch. It's just exhausting at this point. He's so blatant with how much he lies, and it's so obvious that he's only doing this because he's lying to people who he hopes won't know any better. Jim Ryan would never say these kinds of things at like a gaming conference or like at an E3 conference, but he will say this at places like the Remedies hearing or to people like the CMA, because he's just betting on them not knowing any better. He's just betting on getting away with these lies. And make no mistake, that's what they are. He is lying constantly. This company doesn't care about the integrity of the gaming industry. They never have, they never will. And Jim Ryan is the embodiment of that. And the ultimate irony to come out of all of this is the fact that if Jim Ryan had just not said anything when Microsoft said they were going to buy Activision Blizzard, if he had just sat back and let the deal go through, Sony and Activision would probably still have a pretty solid working relationship. But now that Jim Ryan's been going out of his way to try and keep this from happening, and he's just flat out lying about it, and also he's slapping his own first party studios in the face along the way, Jim Ryan is about to utterly destroy Sony's working relationship not only with Activision, but with other third party studios, with their own first party studios, and basically everyone in the gaming industry, because he's shown how dishonest he is, and he's shown how not trustworthy he is. Why would you want to work with a company like this? I'm not saying that people are going to start abandoning the PlayStation or that studios are going to stop releasing on the PlayStation, but mark my words, there is going to be a very, very dramatic shift in the near future in regards to game companies, game studios, and their relationships with the PlayStation brand, for as long as Jim Ryan is in charge of it. Because this is insane. This man's inability to just drop it and admit that he's been lying, it is incredible. It is so childish, and I will happily keep making ad revenue off of it. Toodles.